Vignette 6. Raid from Cheltan on outposts in the Kabul suburbs by Commander Asil Khan. Kabul was surrounded by 3 security belts made up of security outposts manned by Soviet and DRA forces. A battalion from the DRA 8th Infantry Division garrisoned the old highway construction headquarters, commonly known as the Company, in the western suburbs of Kabul. The battalion also guarded a number of government supply depots located across the highway to the west. The battalion built security outposts on the Khwaja Pushta Hills in the south. The battalion protected all its installations with minefields except for the outposts on the hills. This made all the other installations too difficult to attack in the dark. I commanded a joint 200 Mujahideen detachment made up from local resistance units affiliated with NIFA, HIK, and Ittihad-e-Islami, IUA. According to our agreed plan, we were to move from our bases around Cheltan and converge on the target area in the dark. We would continually shell the main battalion camp and the depots, while the assault group would attack the Khwaja Pushta Hill outposts. Map 2-5, Cheltan. In the late afternoon of June 1st, 1985, I led my NIFA Mujahideen from our base at Morgrigaran. We arrived near the target after 2000 hours. We deployed for battle according to plan. I established blocking positions at Ashia-e-Beni and Pul-e-Kusk and deployed about 20 Mujahideen at each position. I positioned one 82mm mortar with its 5-man crew and 2 82mm recoilless rifles, each with a 5-man crew, at Ashia-e-Beni to shell the enemy battalion. The raid began around 2100 hours and lasted until 2300 hours. Our heavy weapons kept the enemy battalion and the depot forces pinned in place. The enemy responded with artillery fire, but made no attempt to counter with infantry or tanks. No enemy helicopters responded throughout the raid. This lack of response left the tactical initiative in my hands. We easily overran the enemy outposts on the Khwaja Pushta Hills and captured weapons and a radio set. Most of the DRA soldiers ran away. At one outpost, we killed 2 enemy soldiers and wounded another. We had no casualties. We pulled out before midnight, and the force split up and returned to their bases. Commentary. Throughout the war, Soviet and DRA forces were reluctant to respond aggressively to Mujahideen night attacks. Unless the Soviet and DRA forces had planned and rehearsed a counterattack drill, they rarely left the relative safety of their prepared positions to deal with Mujahideen night attacks. This encouraged the Mujahideen to harass the enemy continuously at night and to attack the weakest points of their defenses. Often, the Mujahideen boldly attacked areas adjacent to large forces. These security posts were out of supporting range of other posts, so the DRA refusal to react to the attack practically handed the outpost to the Mujahideen. However, the Mujahideen could not fully exploit their enemy's reluctance to fight at night to achieve decisive tactical results. The Mujahideen could not readily penetrate the heavily mined zone surrounding Soviet and DRA positions. As long as the Soviet DRA forces felt no serious threat from isolated Mujahideen night attacks, they preferred to respond by artillery fire instead of risking stumbling into an ambush. The Soviet and DRA response came in the form of well-planned major cordon and search operations in those areas where the Mujahideen had gained an upper hand. Vignette 7. Raid on Mahipar outposts by Commander Wazir Gul. In July 1984, 3 groups of Mujahideen combined to raid Soviet DRA security outposts on the main Kabul-Jalalabad highway, map 2-6, Mahipar. Highway 1 at Mahipar passes through a deep gorge with the river flowing immediately to the north of the road and with a steep ridge rising to the south. Other than the highway, the main access on Mahipar Road is through Mullah Omar Dara, a mountain valley connecting Mullah Omar village with Highway 1. At that time, the DRA had a militia unit headquartered at Mullah Omar. The DRA militia commander was Hassan Khan Karkohel, the local Ghilzai Pashtun chieftain. Hassan Khan was also a secret collaborator with the Mujahideen. He helped facilitate our movements and combat against Soviet DRA forces in the area. My group reached Mullah Omar in the evening after a day march from our base at Tangi Tezin. There, we were joined by two NIFA commanders, Captain Afghan of Dasabs and Syed Hassan Khan of Kaki Jabar. Altogether, we had 80 Mujahideen armed with AK-47s and 303 Enfield rifles, 5 BM1s, 4 82mm recoilless rifles, 4 82mm mortars, 2 Dishkas, and 13 RPG-7s. We planned our combined action at Mullah Omar and moved out the next morning toward Mahipar over Latanaband Mountain. We had packed our heavy weapons on mules. There were 3 chief components in our combined force: 2 fire support groups and an assault group. Each fire support group had BM1s and 82mm mortars. Their mission was to attack and pin down the DRA base on the left flank and the Soviet base on the right flank. The assault group consisted of 3 teams. Each assault team had a designated outpost to attack. Each assault team had RPGs and recoilless rifles to support their attack. In order to minimize the daylight available to the enemy's aircraft, we began our attack at 1600. We knew it would take several hours for them to respond. Our heavy weapons pounded the flanking bases to isolate the attack area. The assault teams began to fire on the security posts and slowly move forward. The attack on the security posts was hindered by the enemy mines, and it took several hours for the Mujahideen to overrun the outposts after heavy clashes. By 2100, the DRA soldiers manning the outposts were either killed or had escaped. We took 1 tank crew prisoner. The Soviet base and outposts further down the road could not support the embattled DRA outposts, but as we pulled out, the Soviet base began heavy fire on the withdrawing Mujahideen groups. Their fire had little effect in the dark. We destroyed 2 tanks, killed 9 enemy soldiers, and captured 3 Dishkas, 6 AK-47 rifles, and a large amount of ammunition. 2 Mujahideen were wounded in the battle. We spent the night at Mullah Omar and returned to our bases the next day. Commentary. The terrain here is very restrictive and rugged. The Soviet DRA bases and outposts were all in the canyon. The Soviet DRA surrendered the initiative in this area and trusted that the difficulty in crossing the rugged terrain, coupled with their bunkers and field fortifications, would protect these sites from the Mujahideen. There were a series of 3 security outposts along the road, 2 on the high ground on both sides of the gorge and the other on the road. The purpose of security outposts was to protect bridges, hydroelectric installations, dams, and block the side valleys. The outposts on the high ground were not high enough to interfere with Mujahideen freedom of action. There were a few observation posts on the high peaks, but they were not effective, particularly at night. The security outposts on the high ground were mostly manned by DRA or militia, which lacked training and were in fact prisoners in their mine-protected enclaves. The Mujahideen could easily bypass them, particularly at night. The Soviets/DRA had mined the main approaches to the gorge, but given the steep nature of the approaches, the mines usually washed away when it rained. The Mujahideen often used such steep areas to descend to the highway. The Mujahideen, on the other hand, saw this setup as an excellent opportunity to punish their opponent, pick up some weapons, and resupply ammunition. The Mujahideen developed a standard pattern for attacking outposts along this road. They would attack late in the afternoon to minimize the effectiveness of airstrikes and artillery. They would fire rockets and mortars at the main base camps on both flanks of the target area to seal the area and hold the attention of the base camps so that they would not interfere with the main attack. Then they would launch the attack against the outposts, which were mostly manned by ill-trained, poorly motivated conscript DRA. The DRA had little stomach for the fight, and once the Mujahideen got through the minefield surrounding the outposts, the Mujahideen would strip the outposts of everything they could carry and disappear into the night. The Mujahideen would usually offer DRA prisoners the opportunity to serve as labor service with the Mujahideen or simply turn them loose. The Mujahideen felt that the conscript DRA soldier had little choice in the fight. DRA officers were kept prisoner until they could be tried by field tribunal. The Mujahideen felt fairly secure from sallies from the base camps at night. Soviet and DRA reaction was mainly limited to area shelling and bombing. Vignette 8. Raid on Lataband security outposts by Commander Wazir Gul. There are two highways between Kabul and Sarobi. The northern highway is the newer one and is part of Highway 1, the main highway of Afghanistan. The older Kabul-Sarobi highway runs roughly parallel to Highway 1, some 10 kilometers to the south. A series of Soviet and DRA security bases and outposts protected both highways. In September 1985, several Mujahideen groups combined to conduct a raid on the Soviet DRA security outposts in the Lataband Pass east of Kabul, map 2-7 Lataband. Lataband is located on the old Kabul-Sarobi highway. The Lataband Pass was protected by a Soviet base at Mullah Omar in the west and a DRA Sarandoy base at Lataband in the east. The area between the two bases was protected by several security outposts manned by DRA militant detachments. My group's base was in Zandakale, which is some 25 kilometers south of the pass. I planned the attack at the base. We left the base at 1500 and moved to the Tizan Valley, where we spent the night. We carried our supplies and ammunition on mules. Once we got to the Tizan Valley, I met with the commanders of the other groups and we coordinated our attack. The total strength of the combined Mujahideen force was about 150 fighters. We left what we did not need for immediate combat at Tizan and moved out toward our targets. We brought the mules with us. There were 3 chief components in our combined force, 2 fire support groups and an assault group. Each fire support group had heavy weapons, 3 BM-1, 4 Dishka, 3 82mm mortars. Their mission was to attack and pin down the Soviet base at Mullah Omar and the Saranday base at Lataband. The assault group had 12 RPG-7s and 4 82mm recoilless rifles. The assault group was composed of 3 20-man teams. Each 20-man team had a designated enemy outpost to attack. We moved into position. In order to minimize the daylight available to the enemy's aircraft, we decided to start our attack in the late afternoon. We began the attack at 1600 with heavy fire on the bases at Mullah Omar and Lataband. Meanwhile, the assault teams occupying the high ground south of the Lataband Pass began to fire on the enemy outpost below. The shelling confused the enemy as the 3 teams of the assault group approached their outposts and launched the attack. The battle continued into the evening and the assault teams overran the enemy outposts. As the Mujahideen approached the outposts, most of the DRA soldiers ran away and left behind an enormous amount of ammunition and other equipment. We loaded what we could on our mules and hauled it away. The enemy responded by saturating the area in and around the outpost with artillery fire and air attacks. We lost 2 mules to artillery fire and so withdrew at 2100. We suffered personnel losses. The losses in my own group were 1 KIA and 6 WIA. We captured 2 DRA soldiers and lots of ammunition and supplies. Commentary. The isolated highway security posts were extremely vulnerable to attacks by Mujahideen who controlled the surrounding high ground. The Soviet DRA had insufficient intelligence or surveillance in the immediate region. Furthermore, their contingency plans to reinforce outposts or to react swiftly against Mujahideen attacks were lacking or poorly executed. The forces and the bases seemed to have a severe case of bunker mentality and passively sat out the Mujahideen shelling and attacks on the outposts. The Soviets and DRA seemed particularly reluctant to move and fight at night. The Mujahideen exploited this reluctance. Air support apparently was slow in coming and was not very accurate at night. In this example, the Soviet DRA base forces waited until the outposts were overrun and the Mujahideen were withdrawing before they reacted. They reacted with artillery and airstrikes, not maneuver forces. The DRA and the outposts were left to their own devices. The DRA forces were generally ill-trained and had poor morale. Most of the DRA soldiers had been press-ganged into the army and had no desire to fight their countrymen. Therefore, the DRA soldiers were more interested in escaping than in stubborn defense and were quite willing to abandon the ammunition and supplies of the outpost to the attacking Mujahideen. The Mujahideen preferred to attack DRA outposts for this reason. Mujahideen dependence on these types of raids for weapons and ammunition cost them casualties. The Soviets and DRA reacted with artillery and airstrikes when they could, but they did not continue them all night long. This gave the Mujahideen the option of immediately entering the camp to seize what material they could, and then leaving to get far away before dawn, or waiting for the artillery to subside and then leaving with less time until daylight. Both courses entailed risk. Vignette 9. Raid on outposts at Reshmin Gorge by Commander Wazir Gul. During October 1985, Mujahideen factions took turns blocking the Kabul-Jalalabad highway at Reshmin Tangay Gorge. Between Dabili and Dargo bridges, map 2-8, Reshmin, my mission was to block the highway for 8 days. At that time, I commanded 70 Mujahideen. We were armed with 5 BM-1s, 2 BM-12s, 4 82mm recoilless rifles, 2 ZGU-1s, 3 82mm mortars, and many RPG-7s. In order to block the highway, I had to remove enemy security posts along that stretch of road. I moved my force from Manay and Hisarek to the Tsapar mountain, where I refined my battle plan. Since there are limited access routes to the area, and since the area near the highway was heavily mined, I decided to launch the initial attack against the flanks of the area we were going to block, i.e., against the Dabili Bridge in the west and Dargo Bridge in the east. These two places are relatively accessible from the mountains in the south. After destroying the road bridges at these 2 points, I planned to isolate the area and continue the attack down the highway against the security outposts. The highway approach was best since the highway itself was not mined. I divided my detachment into 2 groups and moved them to Dabili and Dargo. I kept a reserve centrally located to the rear between the 2 attacking groups. The 2 groups approached the target at night. The next day, they captured the Dabili and Dargo bridges by swift attacks. They immediately destroyed the bridges with explosives. This isolated the area. Then the 2 groups attacked down the road, to avoid the DRA minefields, from the opposite directions. They eventually overran 16 to 17 small Soviet DRA security outposts located on the road. Then they turned around to consolidate their success and reinforce the defenses at the east and west flanks of the blockade. During the next 8 days, the Soviets and DRA tried to reopen the highway but failed. Their airstrikes and artillery were generally ineffective due to the narrowness of the canyon. The enemy sent a column from Jalalabad to force the road, but we stopped them in the narrow confines around Dargo Bridge, and they had to withdraw. We spent the 8 days stripping all the ammunition, weapons, and supplies out of the bases and outposts. We hauled the spoils of war into the mountains. We captured about 100 weapons and an enormous amount of ammunition. At the end of our 8 days, I withdrew my attachment, and we returned to our base. I lost 6 KIA and 18 WIA, or about 30% of my force. Enemy losses were heavier and included some 50 killed or wounded and 24 soldiers captured. Commentary. The terrain played a major role in shaping the battle. The Soviet DRA controlled the ribbon of highway running through a narrow gorge, while the Mujahideen controlled the surrounding mountains whenever they wanted to. The Mujahideen had the freedom to choose the time and place to raid dozens of security outposts sprinkled along the treacherous highway snaking through the very narrow canyon in Mahipar and the Reshmin Tangay. In the Reshmin Tangay, virtually all Mujahideen groups habitually first attacked the 2 main bridges, i.e., Dabili and Dargo. Then, after destroying the bridges, they would attack the rest of the security posts from both ends. This method proved to be most effective given the terrain, minefields, enemy dispositions, and Mujahideen capabilities. Vignette 10. Raid on the bridge post in Alangar by Dr. Abdul Quddus Al-Zokai and Commander Haji Siddiqullah. In February 1986, Commander Abdul Quddus Al-Zokai led a group of 15 Mujahideen on a raid of a government post near the center of the Alangar district in Laghman province. The post overlooked a bridge on the Alangar River near Barwai village, some 4 kilometers north of Mingar. The bridge outpost was located within a walled enclosure and included covered firing positions and parapets. The post included a one-room guardhouse for the 6 soldiers who manned the post. The outpost was part of a security belt protecting the district center against Mujahideen attacks. There were several other outposts in the area, established in individual houses and fort-like structures. Among them were Gulamalai Kala to the north and Yawar Kala and Sahegbol Kala to the south of the bridge post. They were about 150 to 200 meters apart. Map 2-9 Mingar. My guerrilla raiding party left its base in the nearby village at 2200 hours and on a dark, cold, rainy winter night. Moving north to the objective, I dropped a 2-man observation security party opposite the Sahegbol Kala outpost. I posted another 2-man observation security party outside the Yawar Kala outpost and a final 2-man observation security party alongside the road to the bridge. They were to pin down any forces which attempted to come to the aid of the bridge outpost. My 8 remaining Mujahideen and I were armed with 8 automatic rifles and 1 RPG-7. We moved to the bridge and deployed in the cover of a roadside ditch. We completely blocked the western approach to the bridge. My plan was to remain in the ditch until the soldiers at the outpost opened the door of the guardhouse to relieve the sentry. Then, using the light coming from the open door to guide on, we would jump over the low, 1-meter outpost enclosure wall, storm the post, and kill the occupants. We waited for 2 miserable hours in the cold rain, but nothing happened inside the outpost. Finally, I decided to take the initiative. I directed 3 men to move quietly to the post, jump over the wall, and attack the sentry. Then, as soon as the other soldiers started to come out of the guardhouse, we would rush the guardhouse and demand their surrender. I positioned the RPG-7 where it could hit the guardhouse and told the gunner not to fire if we heard his comrades telling the soldiers to surrender. Surrender was the code word. I instructed him to open fire if the enemy initiated contact and opened fire on us. At about 0100 hours, my 3-man party approached the outpost. 1 man covered the team while the other 2 jumped over the wall. One of these Mujahideen landed squarely on the back of the sleeping enemy sentry. The sentry was wrapped in a blanket and sound asleep, but when the Mujahideen landed on him, he woke up and began to shout. My panicked Mujahideen opened fire and killed the sentry. Anticipating the reaction of the guards, 1 Mujahideen tossed a hand grenade into the door of the guard room. As it exploded, they rushed into the structure. My RPG gunner heard the commotion, but did not hear his comrades demanding the enemy surrender. Since the code word was not used, my RPG gunner assumed that the enemy had overwhelmed his comrades and therefore opened fire on the guardhouse. The RPG-7 rocket ripped through the wall of the guardhouse, killing 2 soldiers and seriously injuring one of my Mujahideen standing nearby. This changed the situation drastically. My wounded Mujahideen was calling for help and his comrades stopped to evacuate him. As soon as my other Mujahideen saw their comrades stop to attend to their fallen comrade, they also stopped their attack. I called off the raid and ordered a withdrawal. As we withdrew, my security teams rejoined us and we returned to our base. Commentary. The Mujahideen timing for the raid was ideal. Inclement weather and night movement covered their approach. The enemy guard was even asleep. This lack of enemy alertness was not unusual. The DRA and Soviets usually failed to deploy foot patrols at night between their outposts. There was also little tactical and fire coordination between outposts. This passivity at night resulted in a bunker mentality among the Soviet DRA soldiers manning isolated security outposts and allowed the Mujahideen freedom of movement and the chance to own the night and conduct their hit-and-run raids. Lack of control of the raiding party at the objective foiled an otherwise skillfully planned action. What went wrong was a combination of Murphy's Law, a lack of pre-combat rehearsals, and a lack of a regular chain of command. Landing on a sleeping soldier was bad luck, but dry rehearsals would have exercised the option of an approach being discovered and provided for the continuation of the attack while wounded or being evacuated. Since the force commander did not have communication with his RPG gunner, he needed the firm, positive control that a subordinate leader, located with the RPG gunner, could have provided. Lack of communication, subordinate leadership, and fire coordination at the objective cost the Mujahideen a tactical victory. Chapter Commentary. The Mujahideen raid depended on surprise and quick execution. Raids produced needed weapons, ammunition, and equipment. They also proved a good way to destroy DRA or Soviet security posts and sites. A well-organized raid had an assault force, a fire support group, and a security element. Portable radios were needed to coordinate the raiding elements, but all too often the Mujahideen lacked these radios. The Mujahideen primary obstacle in a raid was to get past the minefields which the Soviet and DRA placed around their security posts and sites. The Mujahideen launched most of their raids at night. They did so to prevent being hit by effective air or artillery strikes and to avoid further contact with the DRA or Soviet forces which were reluctant to leave their garrisons at night.